please take their seats. This is welcome to meeting number 20 of the BEST Committee on the Hill, the International Trade Committee.
Not to be confused with the mighty logo.
I'm going to ask first, we're going to deal with the study budget for C13. You've received the draft of it yesterday for $8,250. Could we adopt that before we start with the witnesses? All those in favor? Adopted. Thank you very much. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, December the 11th, 2025, the committee is resuming its study on Bill C13. And we have back with us today from the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, Jeff Nanakavel, President and Chief Executive Officer, by video conference. He's here. Okay. And from the Canadian Meat Council, we have friends back to see us as well. Claire Chicho, Vice President, International Trade, and Jorge Correa, Vice President, Market Access and Technical Affairs. And from the Canadian Pork Council, Stephen Heckbert, President and Chief Executive Director, and Renee Roy, the Chair, all who have been with us before. So welcome. We will start, as you know, with opening remarks and then proceed with rounds of questions. You each have up to 5 minutes, and we'll start with Mr. Nanakavel, please. I invite you to speak to the committee.
He's muted.
Can you unmute?
Of course. Madam Chair, good morning, and to members of the committee. I'm speaking to you from Singapore, where I arrived today in advance of next week's Canada and Asia Conference, an annual event convened here by the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, and now in its 4th edition. Supported by the Government of Canada and over 24 other partners, this flagship event brings together leaders of businesses and institutions from across Asia and established and aspiring leaders in Asia engagement from across Canada. More than 700 participants attended last year's conference, a majority being from the private sector, 2/3 from across Asia, and 1/3 from Canada. We're on track for similar numbers for next week. I mention this event because it relates directly to my key theme today, that CPTPP expansion is an essential opportunity to advance Canada's core strategic interest of building new networks and new coalitions of like-minded middle powers. Simply put, in a world where our autonomy and reliable access to markets are under assault, we need to use whatever levers are available to us to build durable, rules-based trade arrangements with partners who are committed to continuing trade liberalization and resisting economic coercion. UK accession to the CPTPP is important for Canada because linking the CPTPP to other major trading partners and regional blocs is core to Canada's new strategic needs. The CPTPP itself is a major asset for Canada, doubly so in our present circumstances. It's a high-quality, comprehensive, state-of-the-art trade agreement among a group of countries who are genuinely committed to trade liberalization. Now, the UK is another such country, and the precedent of growing the agreement outside the region is a helpful one for Canadian interests. The successful integration of the UK into the CPTPP signals that a high-standard trade integration is still possible, despite protectionist trends elsewhere in the world. Furthermore, UK accession has already been endorsed by 9 of the 11 CPTPP members, and continuing delay on the part of Canada risks undermining our credibility as a leading voice in this group. Now, this is important because we now have other interests in areas such as defense, security, and foreign policy, where our influence with these key partners depends in part on our reputation as a reliable, engaged player and a positive force in trade expansion. The importance of CPTPP for Canada is such today that at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, we've made it a major element of our overall work, which is aimed at supporting Canadians to understand, connect with, and succeed in Asia. In 2024, we launched a unique evergreen web portal where CPTPP official documents and related research are made available to Canadians and to a global audience, similar to the University of Toronto's G7 Information Centre. And in our current extraordinary geopolitical context, this work has taken on deeper significance and urgency. Of particular importance is the initiative to create linkages between the CPTPP and the European Union, as well as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. Canada is uniquely positioned to play a pivotal role in such arrangements. APF Canada has encouraged such linkages in the past. Prime Minister Carney has advanced the idea recently, and some initial progress was made at November's CPTPP Commission meetings in Australia, where joint statements were issued between the CPTPP and the EU and with ASEAN. The sooner we get ratification of UK accession fully behind us, the more we can focus on advancing this important agenda. For Canadian exporters operating or seeking to operate in multiple regions, any progress in harmonizing regulatory requirements across Europe, the UK, and the Indo-Pacific, even partially, would lower compliance costs and reduce other expensive complexities. And this brings me to my final point. None of this amounts to much if our businesses don't get the information and support they need to benefit from new trade agreements. The federal government, crown corporations, provincial trade ministries, and trade associations must be adequately resourced to follow through with proactive measures to assist Canadian businesses to understand the new opportunities, find new partners, and navigate the regulatory requirements in jurisdictions that are new to them. I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the committee's deliberations. I look forward to your questions, which I'll be pleased to answer in either official language.
Thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful trip there in Singapore. Ms. Sito, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Merci pour l'invitation à présenter.
Thank you for your invitation to appear before the committee today on behalf of the Canadian Meat Council of Canada.
Meat industry, known as the CMC. CMC is the largest component of the food processing sector with over $32 billion in annual sales and nearly 300,000 jobs across the country. Our members process more than 90% of Canada's meat, supplying Canadian families and over 90 export markets with safe, high-quality protein around the world. Our sector depends on trade for value, diversification, and carcass utilization, with over half of Canadian meat production destined for export markets, such as the US, China, Japan, Mexico, and South Korea. From the Canadian Meat Council's perspective, UK accessions is a disappointment and a loss of negotiating leverage for Canada, though it will not significantly change the day-to-day reality for our beef and pork exporters. The UK continues to apply the same non-tariff barriers and sanitary and phytosanitary measures as the EU, so our core market access challenges remain largely unchanged. For beef, there is a strong interest in high-quality Canadian product, but the primary challenge is the limited availability of hormone-free cattle needed to reliably serve the UK market. This supply constraint is effectively the only barrier for small and medium-sized plants that can meet EU standards and UK standards and could otherwise consider exporting, as they're well-positioned to serve this niche market. Until we address this structural supply issue, CETA, the UK FTA, or CPTPP accession alone will not unlock the full potential of the UK or EU as premium markets for Canadian beef.
For pork, the priority is the removal of burdensome testing requirements, notably for Trichinella, which act as a red tape and limit trade flows despite a strong demand of Canadian fresh, high-value pork. Securing science-based recognition of Canada's controlled housing and on-farm food safety programs and eliminating unnecessary, costly testing would deliver a tangible and significant boost to pork exports to both to the UK and the EU in the near term, aligning with the government's goal, doubling exports. Another impediment for some of the largest Canadian plants is the requirement for complex, multi-year scientific review dossier. Science-based antimicrobial interventions, such as organic acids, have improved food safety and product shelf life, but their use in the export remains subject to lengthy and complex approval processes in the UK and the EU. The Canadian industry must further advance the required submission and work with the government to move this file forward. Our message today is that the Canadian red meat remains committed to the UK market, where genuine opportunities exist, but the focus now must be on practical technical fixes. We encourage the government to use every available mechanism, CETA, CPTPP, the Trade Continuity Agreement and our SPS dialogues to resolve SPS and regulatory barriers rather than stepping away from existing agreements for further weakening Canada's leverage. This is all for CMC.
Very much. Well done. Mr. Roy, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for having us here today. My name is René Roy. I am a president of the Canadian Pork Council. I'm here with Stephen Hegbert, who is the president and CEO. We represent more than 7,000 pork producers in Canada, from one coast to the other.
Economic engine. And we are an export-focused industry with more than half of our product exported to countries around the world. From our perspective, the UK accession to the CPTPP means we have surrendered our negotiating leverage for Canada, but we understand the need for real politics in today's environment. This will not significantly change the day-to-day reality of our pork producers or processors, since UK continues to apply the same non-tariff trade barriers, sanitary and phytosanitary measures as the European Union. Our market access challenges will remain. For pork, if we could remove burdensome testing requirements, notably for Trichinella, which serve only to limit trade flow despite strong demand for Canadian fresh, high-value pork. Canada has not had a case of Trichinella for almost 70 years, so this is no longer a requirement for health protection. It's simply a non-tariff trade barrier. Securing science-based recognition of Canada Controlled Housing and On-Farm Food Safety Program and eliminating this unnecessary, costly testing would deliver a tangible and significant boost to pork export to both the UK and the EU in the near term, aligning with the government goals of doubling export. As free traders, Canada pork producers remain committed to growing opportunities in markets where genuine desires for free trade exist. We are asking for a focus on delivering true access with practical fixes rather than the symbolism of another agreement. We encourage the government to use mechanisms available, notably CETA, CPTPP, the Trade Continuity Agreement, and our SPS dialogues to resolve these SPS and regulatory barriers. We want to bring our high-quality Canadian pork to the world, and we know that British pork farmers simply cannot produce enough pork to serve their market. At present, they import high-cost EU pork, which merely serves to drive up their food cost for their consumers. In a world where our alliances need to help focus on food security as well as national security, we know we can be a reliable source of delicious pork and pork products for Great Britain. Thank you, and we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you all very much. On to our members, please. Mr. Grillo for 6 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente, chers invités.
Hello, Madam Chair, and to our witnesses. Hello. My question is for the President of the Canadian Pork Council, Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, are pork producers satisfied with the trade relations with the UK? No, the problem really is a matter of non-tariff barriers. We want to have a trade that is fluid between partners based on science. Presently, the bases are not equal. because you have, on the one hand, they're talking about a parasite, trichinella, which has not been seen for more than 70 years here. So this is not an argument that is realistic to put in a trade agreement. It merely blocks our access to a product. While our food safety is really the highest in the world, absolutely. The way we see it, it's a protectionism measure. It's protectionary, and as I mentioned earlier, there are others that have access to this market, but they are the UK is blocking access for Canadian producers and processors. Do they have more tariff barriers than we do in Canada? Not to our knowledge. With respect now to food safety, what did you alluded to that? What did you mean? We know that the socio-political situation has significantly changed. And as a superpower in terms of agricultural production, Canada can use its superpower to create a strategic approach because food safety is a national safety matter. If we create this alliance well beyond the military, and if we accede to this level of detachment and cooperation in food, we have the capacity to produce, to be a strategic ally, and I'm not sure if my colleague wants to add anything to that. With respect to this, let me turn to Japan. Japan is quite aware that we are watching and that we are a pork exporter, a basic one, and they can be quite confident that Canada is worthy of trust in terms of food safety. So our ability and our capacity to produce food in such a way where we can form alliances throughout the world is a solid one. If I understand correctly, you have a great deal of capacity, excess capacity, that much greater than is the capacity in the UK. Are you capable of meeting the needs there? Yes, we can export. We have that capacity, and to other markets, as well as dealing with ours. We've heard that this may be a bad agreement, but is there any way that these non-tariff barriers can be eliminated to facilitate the agreement? When we talk about products entering Canada, and yet we can't access their markets, it doesn't make any sense. Well, that really is, that opens a whole breach in the agreement. It is an opening there that could apply to other areas. Should we not consider that further? Well, there is fear about that, and that's one of the reasons why we today have given you our testimony. We want Parliament to understand. We need that. We need to be sure that this will not create a precedent that will appear in other agreements. This agreement beforehand was, I would say, a very good one because we had access to the markets that were covered by the agreement, and it was advantageous, very advantageous for us. But if there is one member of the agreement that puts forward this type of barrier, it could perhaps spread to other countries within the agreement. And this is why we bring it up today to you. We just want to be sure that this does not become a precedent in all agreements.
Est-ce que le gouvernement canadien
Very quickly, should the government of Canada look more closely and defend its agreements that have been forged with others under CETA? Yes. Yeah.
Very much. On to Monsieur Lavoie, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank
Merci.
you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today with us. It's very much appreciated. My first question is for Mr. Nakiavel. We know that the agreement, the accession of the UK, represents an opportunity for Canada. We know of certification that is important, but for the ordinary Canadian, can you perhaps draw a picture for me of before and after today's situation and what the situation will be after the agreement is signed? What will be the consequence for the ordinary Canadian? Can you draw me a picture of that?
Est-ce qu'il est là?
Is he there?
Oui.
No, c'est moi.
No, I'm there. It's my fault. Sorry. You're talking about the accession of the UK and what that would change. When you speak about beforehand and afterwards, yes, just for the ordinary Canadian. When the UK, if it were to join, what will that mean? What change will that mean for the ordinary Canadian? So draw me a picture of before and after. From one day to the next, there won't be a lot of change. When you talk about the consequence of the UK's accession, but the committee has heard Madame Lecher, and there are already linkages with the and ties with the UK, and that will continue. But the importance of this stage is such that it is a signal. It will show the rest of the world. It demonstrates that Canada is going to continue to pursue its expanding markets, and that will open opportunities to further expand, to pursue further expansion. So from one day to the next, I don't think you'll notice a great deal of change in the field or in the overall landscape. But over the medium term to the long term, there will be markets opening up to Canadian exports. So if I understand correctly, this is a signal perhaps that we are giving to the world that we intend to continue to open up markets, given the situation with the United States and China as well. If we were to be increasingly independent from the United States, where would be the point, the balance point? We might seek new markets, but to participate in, do we diversify? What do you see? What would the balance be for Canada? Well, it's very difficult to say now. It is, I would say, a balance that will establish itself. But what is very important here is that we have the tools to increase our options, to broaden our options, and to push forward with Washington to the very limit. Yes, certainly the Washington and the Americans are our partners, our trade partners. But I would look to Washington, certainly, still. But what I think, my impression is that what we've learned in recent days is that we have to push hard, go to the wall, go to the limit with Washington, because we don't know tomorrow. For example, with China, we don't know tomorrow what President Trump might do with China. What type of deal might be made? We can't be unaware of that, and we have to protect our own interests. Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Roy. You talked about scientific matters earlier. You said that it's been 70 years since that particular bacteria was found here in our pork. Can you tell me what that represents in terms of time and money to pursue scientific tests? The parasite involved requires testing, and we have to have a large number of carcasses, which makes exporting prohibitive to the UK. That's the problem, because this parasite hardly exists at all in our production now. Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you all for your presentations today. My first question will go to the gentleman who is online from the Asia Pacific Foundation. But also you have touched on this, all of you, the problem of regulations, phytosanitary regulations, food regulations. SPS?
To sell to the EU or the UK. Yes. So trichinella testing and then supply. And then the lengthy requirements to complete dossiers that we need to submit to the EU or the UK for approvals.
Parfait, merci. Maintenant qu'on dit ça, moi,
Thank you. I've heard a lot about it being very difficult to trade with Europe, that there are non-tariff barriers. Now, when you compare the EU and the UK, is it more or less similar?
Because the UK adopted the EU requirements, SPS requirements, so I think from our perspective at least, we view the UK as an extension of the EU.
Nous, on nous a vanté cet accord-là.
We've heard that this agreement is a wonderful opportunity for exporters. Have you heard any type of commitment from the UK to promote and favor the entry of our goods there? No. 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 In actual fact, quite on the contrary to what has been expressed. There will be barriers that will deal with the animal welfare, but the type of barrier we are uncertain of given one country versus the other. So we're faced with a major asymmetrical problem here. Well, we didn't hear that they would give exclusive access to Canada. They repeated the same thing that they always say, the same rules that exist now. The UK is the third largest importer of pork in the world. They will continue with their standards, but they're not able to set a standard for Canada. When we talk about follow-up for health problems or looking at our processing plants, they have no answers for us. Well, our system, our production system is different from that in the UK. There are many animals that are there and are exposed to this trichinella. But it's not like that in Canada. For us, it's a lot easier to guarantee that we don't have that type of parasite here. But they say that they conduct this test there in their way, in their fashion, but we don't have that in Canada. So it's really a test that would have to be produced in the same way that they test, but that would not be very profitable for us because the cost of a carcass is much more expensive in terms of this testing. 45 to 50% of their pork is from outside the UK, and that becomes more expensive. And it's surprising to us because for us, we could offer a product which would be much better for them, much more profitable for them. And we look at a situation, and what you are seeming to say, and stop me if I'm mistaken, that Canadian standards are completely honest, but British meat is just brought in. Is that what you are saying? Well, yes. It's not the same system as in Canada. We have requirements in terms of trichinella, as do they, but their meat comes in. 3 million carcasses would represent $4 to $6 billion for testing purposes if you had to do that for access to the UK. Well, we all want the diversification of partners and access to new markets, but we all want to be part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but there are arguments in terms of the negotiations. Diversification. Are you going to? Can you say there's a possibility of suspending the negotiations to obtain something in exchange in our
appointment? Precisely to this, yes.
Thank you very
Qu'est-ce qu'on
much. I'm sorry, we're like 10 seconds over.
qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire?
What can we do?
Avoir une entente qui nous permet
Obtain an agreement that would allow us to limit this need for testing that costs millions of dollars and which makes our processors having to send meat out that would not be fresh.
Madam Chair, if I can pick up where my colleague, I think, was in questioning more or less, we believe in a science-based trading regime. You're describing circumstances where the science supports our products here in Canada and our exports and the opportunity to export to the United Kingdom. I wonder if you could update me on what your organizations have been told about the status of discussions with the UK on these specific issues that are the trade barriers being put in place. Are you being kept up to date? Where do we stand? Is there hope for some progress?
We are aware that there are conversations that happen between our officials and officials in the UK. We've also heard that progress with the UK is perhaps not as strong as it might be with Europe at this moment. So if I was sort of grading my hope, I would say my hope with Europe is probably 40%. My hope with the UK is probably lower than that. I think the challenge is that pork's a global commodity. So we have competitors from Brazil who have a lower cost product than other markets, and so the battle that sometimes folks take to protect their domestic production can lead to them creating barriers that have two impacts. One, it keeps a partner they probably would like to see doing business with them, like Canada, out of the market. But I think the second problem is that it may keep their food costs higher than they would like them to be. And I think this is the real challenge, is having a conversation with folks, not only at the bureaucratic level, if I may be honest, but also at the political level. Because I think sometimes, the food affordability question is harder to manage for someone who works inside as a government official. And I do think that's probably a political level conversation that probably has to be had between folks from Canada and the UK.
And from the Meat Council?
I want to add that we remain in really close communications with the bureaucrats, the negotiators, the ministers' offices, and there is a gamut of trade negotiations happening and being implemented, market access issues. You know, the UK and the EU are important high-value markets, but there's also lots of work being done as well elsewhere, Indonesia, China as well. A lot of good and important work is happening there as well. But yes, we remain in contact with officials, and we sense an openness on the part of the EU to have conversations, which I think we need to leverage and build upon.
I very much appreciate your reflection of the place that any particular trading relationship has in Canada's overall spectrum of trading relationships around the world. And we're all well aware of current circumstances with our single largest trading partner and some of the pressures that's putting on us. But right now we're just talking about the accession of the UK to the CPTPP. And in that context, it seems to me that now is the time to bring up some of these issues. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. I want to refer to a press release that the Canadian Meat Council put out. Quote, Canadian meat is currently severely disadvantaged in the interim agreement with the UK as the technical non-tariff trade barriers have resulted in Canada being unable to access the UK market, while the UK enjoys unfettered access to the Canadian market. Now, this is not a surprise. It's exactly what we're talking about this morning. But that press release was just over 2 years ago. And that's, again, something I'm trying to get out. Last week, we heard from the minister, conversations. When do we stop having conversations and try to use some of the dispute resolution mechanisms that do exist in our trade agreements to try and see matters resolved? Have you heard anything about that from the Liberal government?
Haven't heard anything about using trade dispute resolution mechanisms. Are aware of the conversations, and I guess what I would say is, we continue to provide requested information when folks ask us for information. We continue to provide them with information, and I would say I think we have a very good working relationship with folks either from CFIA or Agriculture Canada who are having these conversations with their international partners. I think it's about motivation. I think there's a motivation question probably on the other side to is this a pressing concern for them? And I would say there probably are times when they continue to have the dialogue without necessarily trying to achieve an end to it. And I guess what I would say is on the balance of things that you have to advance in one of these trade agreements, we accept that there's a big broad world of conversations that have to happen in any of these single trading agreements. One of the things we're raising today is just that please, continue to have this conversation about pork in our case and about meat in general, just so that it's one of the
Egbert, I'm going to interject simply.
I'm sorry, Mr. McKenzie, we're 12 seconds over already, or 29 seconds over already.
I apologize, Madam Chair. I had 30 seconds more on my clock.
Okay. Well, I guess I have to go with the clerk's clock, and you're now 39 seconds over from the next. Mr. Navki.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And again, thank you to all the witnesses for being here in person, virtually. It's always a great pleasure to work with you and engage in these very thoughtful conversations. I appreciate that. I'll start with Mr. Nankival. Good to see you again, virtually this time, albeit. Thank you for all the important work you're doing in Canada and abroad. You did speak about in favor of this agreement between the accession of UK into CPTPP. And I think you kind of alluded to a bit around linking Asia Pacific and Europe and how pivotal role this agreement can play. Can you speak a little bit more about, especially in the context of the sort of the geoeconomic circumstances we find ourselves, why that link between Canada, the link between Europe and Asia Pacific is important, and the role Canada can play in Where does this agreement fit into that?
Yeah, I'd be pleased to do that. And Madam Chair, I welcome the question and the opportunity. I think you can look at it. We are look at a globe. We are geographically, pivotal between those two regions, but also geopolitically, we are extremely well placed as one of the larger middle powers. If you look at the whole scope of who are members of the United Nations, and a member of the the G7, the G20, APEC, the Organization of the Americas, and so on. And so we are well placed to be considered a valuable partner in this at a time when we find, I can speak to my own experience and that of my colleagues from APF Canada in the travels that we do around the region here in Asia over the last year, we've seen a real sea change in the interest and appetite in these countries and economies to take a fresh look at Canada and because all of these countries, all of these economies are themselves facing similar challenges to Canada. It's not existential for any of them quite the way it is for Canada and Mexico because of our relationship with the U.S., but they all have their own challenges with the U.S., and they also have their challenges with China, as we do. And so they're looking to diversify. And so I think we have a moment where there is some momentum, some impetus. The European Union is looking to increase its autonomy and to play a greater role on the global stage. It's a heavyweight in trade matters, always has been since it came together, but it underperforms in areas of defense and security. And this is a time when all of these things are linked through the concepts of economic security and resilience. And so I would say in brief that the stars are kind of aligned with an alignment of priorities across countries in the Indo-Pacific region and in Europe and the UK to look to find like-minded partners who are committed to maintaining and building, where possible, a rules-based international trading order, who are prepared to submit themselves to the disciplines of dispute resolution mechanisms, which is an important feature of the CPTPP as a high-quality trade agreement, and who are looking for ways to bridge those things. At this point, this is a long game. We're not talking about concluding a free trade agreement where everything is harmonized across CPTPP and the European Union and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. But we are at a point where linkages can be made in certain areas, in certain sectors, in certain regulatory streams, in areas like digital trade, where we're not so far away from being able to harmonize. And that has concrete benefits for Canadian businesses because the complexity of the new world of trading blocks and regional agreements is a really significant challenge for Canadian businesses. And basically everything you try to do is more expensive these days.
You have 16 seconds remaining.
I have 16 seconds. So very quickly to my friends from both Meat and ProCouncil, I am hearing from you that you support government's approach in signing these important trade agreements and diversifying our trade.
As long as they are fair and based on science.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, alors,
Yes. I'm going to direct my question to the gentleman from the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. In 2025, according to you, would you believe that the CPTPP would make of us a super power? We know what is happening with China and its interest in Taiwan, all of these geopolitical, very complex concerns. Now, there is a regulation that deals with state investors. The UK has been concerned about that. It has tried to go after the government for many times. We want to be able to guarantee a decent salary and the use of better fuels. Do you believe that this partnership will continue to increase its members, the number of its members? And do you think that this will in any way change the situation of the UK at the time of entry? Answer. It's a very controversial issue that you have raised with respect to the numbers and the members. It is something that is now being examined by a review process under the CPTPP members this year, which is being led by the chairman of the commission. There are protections and there are limits that have already been put in place, as is the case now. Canada has participated in the setting in place of these limits, and there are direct contacts between the partners on this matter. But Canadian investors and the member states and the member economies of this group, they too want a protection that is there under the agreement, and therefore it is a matter of institutions that are accountable for pension funds for the for Canadian citizens, for Quebec citizens, and it is a matter of establishing a balance between the offensive and defensive interests.
5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. My initial questions will be to the Meat Council and the Pork Council. In the past, you have, over the last several years, described this deal, and I'll paraphrase, as a bad deal. Is that still your view today?
All right, I'll start then. Yes, it is still a bad deal. We understand the situation, the geopolitical situation, but today, in the circumstance where we cannot trade, and they can trade with us, this is still unfair. So it's not a good deal.
Yeah, I think we also confirm that it's not the best deal we can have ever. And we believe it will be difficult to continue or be viable for the industry, this current deal, because the United Kingdom is still very relying on the European Union, and the regulatory context and framework that they have together, they will bring us to the same place we were maybe 2, 3, 5 years ago when we signed CETA. So we're exactly in the same space now.
I'll just put it in context in terms of numbers for you, sir. So we have a trade deficit in a product that the UK imports more than 50% of that product. We have a trade deficit with the UK of $56 million in this commodity. So clearly something's gone awry in terms of the normal working of a market. If we are a 70% export nation, they are a 50% import nation, and they're exporting $56 million of product to our market. It just doesn't really, the math isn't mathing.
Thank you. We had officials from Global Affairs here at our previous meeting with the minister, and they indicated to the committee that the Government of Canada's intention is to maintain the trade continuity agreement on top of and above access provided by the TPP. Are you aware of that?
I was not aware of that.
No, I'm seeing head shaking, so I take that as a general no. Do you have a view on whether the government should provide access under 2 agreements rather than just 1?
I think in principle, sort of, we're supportive of having, for example, we know the government is pursuing individual trade agreements with countries where we may also have a blanket agreement. And in cases where that can clarify some of these questions within those kinds of FTA agreements or even CEPA agreements, that can be beneficial. But if neither agreement is delivering results for us, then I guess the number one question we would have is, where is the table at which we can seek some resolution of these? And as long as that's clear to us, then I guess that would be what we would ask for from the government as we have these discussions. So if that's at the continuity agreement table, excellent. But if it's at the CPTPP table, then also just in terms of where can we clarify how we can get some resolution around these SPS questions, that would be.
And on that point, we've had the trade continuity agreement for years, and we've had no resolution, and it seems like we'll have no resolution under CPTPP. So to your point, where is the table for these discussions to be happening? In just the last minute I have, I also want to ask about dispute resolution. Both agreements, TPP and CETA, or the Trade Continuity Agreement, provide for consultations, conciliatory measures, and ultimately dispute resolution. Do you think that we're at the stage in time where the government should be considering availing itself of those benefits? I mean, we believe in having this agreement, and dispute resolution is part of that. And if you have a view on that, I'd like to hear it. And if not, maybe at what point do you think that the government should look at those options?
I would hope that we'd be able to access and use the existing mechanisms, SPS mechanisms, within each of those agreements before we get to the dispute resolution stage. We have not heard from our members on this yet, but if this is something that comes up in the future, we'll decide. The organization the board will decide on this. But I think
how
there
much
are
longer do you
mechanisms.
think discussion should be the tactic, I guess, is the question. We've had a couple years of the Trade Continuity Agreement discussions. The minister was here last week. We just heard more discussions. Is that satisfactory to you right now?
No, it is not. And that's why we're here to say that more needs to be done, both with the UK, within the CPTPP context, and the EU as well. And I would add that, back to your earlier question, I think if there is the TCA continuity agreement, the CPTPP, I think all it does is provide venues for companies to see which agreement they want to utilize. We see that in other contexts as well. Mercosur is part of both CUSMA and CPTPP as well. Indonesia, same thing with the broader ASEAN.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, 52 seconds over. Madame Lapointe.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Bienvenue à vous
Thank you,
tous.
Madam Chair, and welcome all once again. Mr. Egbert, earlier you said that UK does not produce enough pork for their domestic consumption. Where do they buy it from? From the EU, for the most part. They were former members of the EU, and consequently, they have agreements and trade habits. But they also purchase from Denmark, from the Netherlands, for the most part. And if the market were ever to be opened up to other possibilities, they would be a possibility of looking towards the UK. But everybody is wondering, is it the time now, given that we want to establish new international relations, trading relations? Earlier you said that their internal production, domestic production, is not enough for their consumption. So, what are the products that the people in the UK like to consume? Other products, lamb, chicken, or are they seeking to close down their markets, their pork markets, in terms of other countries? No, they like pork. They'd like to have a higher domestic production, but pork producers are losing producers. There are a lot of people are getting out of their market, and so they have to bring in more pork for their consumption. But if you take a look at the percentage of protein purchases, it's not really a matter of stressing pork, of emphasizing pork, but really what they want to do is to encourage their pork producers in the UK to stay in the market, to boost up their production. But when there are free trade agreements, sometimes domestic production becomes more competitive. Maybe I didn't understand, but it seemed that you're afraid, well, given that their own pork production is insufficient, that they hesitate to bring in your pork. In the context of an open market, they act like Canada. It is the commercial, the trade balance that is negative, though. So even though they export some, they have to import a significant volume of pork for domestic consumption. I have a question now for Mr. Nan Kivel, the gentleman who is in Singapore right now, 13 hours difference from our time here. I was involved in the first round of negotiations there, and I thank you for being there now. Do you look at the negotiations in terms of UK positively right now? Yes, it is a significant step because it represents a broadening of the group beyond the region itself. So we don't hear you, sir. Yes, can you hear me now? Yes? It is a very high quality agreement with very high standards, and the supply is of high quality. It gives us a new opportunity to build a new network with middle powers that share the same values as we do and who are dedicated to a system like that of Canada and that Canada seeks to have. That is why we see this as a particular stage as being a very important one. But on the middle term, in the mean term, there will be practical effects for us. Thank
our witnesses again for coming back to see us. And hopefully the next time we see you, we'll be celebrating somehow or another overcoming some of the issues that you raised. So we will suspend for a moment before we bring in our other witnesses. We have with us today by video conference Canadian Alliance of British Pensioners, Edwina Melville Gray, the chair of the board. And we have from Canadian Cattle Association, Tyler Fulton, president by video conference, and Jennifer Babcock, Chief Government and International Affairs Officer. And the British Canadian Chamber of Trade and Commerce, Martin Buckle, Vice President. Welcome to you all. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We will start with Ms. Melville Gray for opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and honourable members of the Standing Committee on International Trade for the opportunity to provide you with testimony today. The Canadian Alliance of British Pensioners support strong trade relations between Canada and the United Kingdom. We welcome UK accession to the CPTPP. We do not oppose Bill C-13, but Canada should not ratify this agreement without first securing equity and reciprocity for the people who built both our countries. More than 100,000 UK state pensioners live in Canada. They worked, contributed, and paid into the UK system for decades. They earned their pensions. Yet, because they chose to retire in Canada, their pensions are frozen forever. If they lived in the USA, the EU, or Turkey, they would receive full annual increases. In Canada, they do not. The only difference is geography. This is discrimination by postal code. For example, Anne Puckridge is 101. A Second World War veteran, she moved to Canada in 2001 to be near family. Her pension has been frozen for 25 years at £72.50, $135 a week. Had she moved to the US, she would receive today £180 or $336 a week. She did everything right, served, contributed, followed the rules, yet has been penalized for choosing Canada. With inflation exceeding 60% since 2001, her purchasing power has collapsed, and Canadian taxpayers now help fill the gap. Through GIS and other income supports, Canada now spends significantly more than $200 million annually supporting British pensioners who should be supported by the UK system they paid into. This is a moral and fiscal issue. Globally, more than 400,000 UK pensioners are frozen. Nearly 90% of frozen pensioners live in each and every one of the CPTPP countries, with most living in Canada and Australia. This reflects outdated post-war arrangements that no longer match modern mobility or modern values. Canada operates CPP and OAS abroad, including in the UK. The UK does not reciprocate. Successive Canadian governments have raised this issue politely, respectfully, and persistently. Nothing has changed. UK officials admit the policy has not been reviewed in 70 years. Why? Because there has been no leverage until now. Bill C-13 gives Canada leverage. Once ratification occurs, it disappears. Canada is being asked to grant permanent trade privileges, market access, tariff elimination, and investment flows worth billions, while leaving pension injustice untouched. That sends the wrong signal. As Prime Minister Mark Carney warned, middle powers can no longer afford to go along to get along, which is what Canada has been doing on frozen pensions. This is the moment to insist that trade reciprocity includes people, not just products and capital. UK Treasury officials cite operating costs of £930 million. That assumes full historic equalisation, something the UK has never done in past agreements. Official UK FOI data shows that the real cost of operating pensions in Canada would be about £13 million, $24 million, for 2027-28. That is a rounding error on a UK pension budget of £146 billion per annum. The barrier is not money, it is political will. We are not asking to rewrite the CPTPP. We are not asking to block accession. We are asking for a responsible pause. A pause to secure a formal UK commitment to amend the reciprocal social security agreement to include annual uprating. That is not obstruction, it is good governance. It is standing up for residents of Canada. It protects Canadian taxpayers and it strengthens Canada's credibility. We therefore ask this committee to recommend, first, that Bill C-13 not proceed until Canada obtains a formal UK commitment to enter negotiations on annual uprating for UK state pensioners residing in Canada. Second, that ESDC and Global Affairs Canada actively pursue a modernized bilateral reciprocal social security agreement with the UK that explicitly provides for annual pension uprating. Trade access should not move forward on a one-way basis while pension justice remains frozen. After 70 years, it is time for equity and reciprocity. And this is the moment, as Mark Carney said, to take the sign out of the window and for Canada to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fulton, please.
Good morning. My name is Tyler Fulton, and I'm the president of the Canadian Cattle Association. Together with my wife, we have a beef cattle operation in Birtle, Manitoba. I'm joined here today by Jennifer Babcock. We're both dialing in from our U.S. counterparts meeting, CattleCon, this week. Unfortunately, we can't join you in person, but as you can imagine, trade with the U.S. is our highest priority, and our leadership team is on the ground working closely with our friends south of the border. That said, we're pleased to join the committee virtually today to discuss the UK's accession to CPTPP, or Bill C-13. Today, we want to clarify CCA's position on the UK accession to CPTPP, as well as address our ongoing concerns with the UK's non-tariff barriers. Regarding the UK's accession to CPTPP, the reason CCA is opposed to the UK's accession from the beginning is due to the UK not following the high standards of the CPTPP agreement. Once the UK left the EU, we were hopeful that they would remove non-tariff barriers and be a trusted trading partner for Canada. However, the continuity agreement between Canada and the UK, an agreement that was always understood to be a temporary bridge before a new agreement, we saw the UK's trade practices in action. The UK continued to follow the EU's example and put up non-tariff barriers to keep our beef out of their market. When the UK wanted to ascend to CPTPP, we were opposed because they would water down the agreement, the agreement's high standards, and set a dangerous precedent for other countries wanting to join. The CPTPP continues to be a positive agreement for Canadian beef producers, particularly in Japan, and we also see market potential with other Asian markets such as Vietnam. Canada had an important negotiating lever with the UK with our veto. However, Canada did not use our veto and instead allowed the UK to join before addressing our non-tariff barriers. Unfortunately, Canada lost negotiating power. The second we allowed the UK into the CPTPP without getting something in return, it was for this reason that CCA asked the government to give notice to the UK to pull out of the continuity agreement with the intent to restart bilateral negotiations where our issues could be addressed. Last June, Canada and the UK committed through parallel exchanges of letters to work together on issues of relevance to trade in the meat sector. Yet there has been no progress made on addressing any of the meat issues and ensuring meaningful trade access. Following the Prime Minister's announcement to set up a technical working group to address market access issues, there have been no indications of progress on Canadian beef access. We urge the government to not give anything further to the UK until our non-tariff barriers are addressed, using whatever available mechanisms possible. Resolving these barriers would be consistent with the scientific findings, would not cost the UK any money, and would allow Canadian beef the opportunity in their market and compete in the market like other CPTPP countries. CCA continues to offer our support to the Government of Canada to reach the best trade deals possible for Canadian beef producers and all Canadians. The pathway for economic growth and trade diversification is through meaningful, rules-based trade. In these uncertain geopolitical times, Canadian beef producers need every opportunity to diversify our markets with trusted trading partners. At a time when the government is looking to diversify trade, we should focus our trade negotiations towards looking with like-minded allies to find solutions that benefit both of our economies. We look forward to your questions and getting into more detail. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Buckle, the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes, sir.
I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to appear before you today. The British-Canadian Chamber of Trade and Commerce was founded in June 1951 under our original name, the British-Canadian Trade Association, so this is our 75th anniversary year. The Chamber exists to promote the transatlantic business interests of our members and stakeholders, and our mission includes 4 objectives: to promote the bilateral development of trade, commerce, and investment between the UK and Canada, to help create better understanding between the Canadian and British business communities, to provide opportunities for members to meet for business and social networking, and to represent the opinion of the British business community in Canada on trade, commerce, finance, and industry, and to represent the Canadian business community in the UK in the same respects. It is this 4th pillar that brings me here today to speak in favour of Bill C-13. The total trade between our 2 countries varies from year to year, particularly as commodity prices change, but the UK remains Canada's 3rd largest export market, and the two-way balance of trade in goods and services exceeded $50 billion in the 12 months to the end of June 2025. The UK's financial trade with Canada exceeds that of Italy and Spain combined, despite the proximity and size of those 2 countries to the UK. Most of our trade is covered by the Continuity Agreement, signed after Brexit, and a new bilateral agreement is much needed, but seemingly some way off still. The CPTPP is an opportunity for our 2 countries to affirm our mutual commitment to fair trade that does more than simply remove tariffs. It's a high-standard, forward-looking framework that includes strong commitments to digital trade, data flows, intellectual property, labour, and environmental protections. These are rules that Canada supports and even helped design. The UK's entry also strengthens the CPTPP itself. Britain brings economic weight, investment capacity, and strong alignment with Canada's approach to labour and environmental standards. The inclusion of the UK makes the CPTPP an even more attractive partner for future members, reinforcing a rules-based trading order that brings social, environmental, and economic benefits. COVID taught the world a lesson in supply chain resilience. The Russian invasion of Ukraine gave us another supply shock. And extreme tariffs on trade with the US, yet another. The CPTPP gives UK and Canadian companies more flexibility, more places to source, to process, and to export. It spreads risk and strengthens our combined economic security. After Brexit, there was an uptick in UK companies reaching out to our chamber to learn more about Canada and doing business here. After the introduction of tariffs on many goods heading from Canada into the USA, we started to see an uptick in Canadian companies looking to trade with the UK. Changes in the global structure of trade focus attention on the opportunities as well as the challenges those changes introduce. The spotlight illuminates everybody. Last week, we joined Canadian and Scottish businesses online to prepare for Scotland-Canada Business Week at the end of April 2026. This initiative offers a unique opportunity to connect Scottish and Canadian businesses looking for new export or investment opportunities. Meanwhile, the West Highland Chamber of Commerce will be making another trade mission to Nova Scotia in March. Last year, Virgin Atlantic opened a new route between Toronto and London Heathrow, and in partnership with WestJet, the carrier is now able to open up Canada to more travellers than ever before, whilst its onward connections from London to Europe, India, Africa, and the Middle East enable greater opportunities for Canadian companies to access global markets. This year, starting in May, WestJet will connect 4 times weekly with Cardiff, the capital of Wales, and gateway to the western parts of the UK. I don't want to upset any of our Italian friends, but if Wales makes it to the World Cup this year, fans will have the easiest route than ever to visit Toronto and support their team. The social, economic, and cultural ties between our countries are flourishing, and this bill gives Parliament the opportunity to support our values, our businesses, and to support that flourishing future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buckle, and congratulations on the 75th anniversary. Certainly seeing a lot of accomplishments. All right, on to our members. So, Mr. Mantle, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for their testimony this morning and afternoon. My first questions will be directed to the Cattle Association. Your association has previously described the deal that we're currently considering, the UK's accession, as a bad deal. Is that still your position?
Yeah, to be clear, we have shipped no Canadian beef into the UK for the last 2 years. And so, but on the other hand, there's more than 40 million, I think, flowing from the UK into Canada. So when it's that one-sided, I think it's pretty clear there's a problem.
Thank you. We had officials from Global Affairs present at the committee last week, and they informed us that it's the intention of the Government of Canada to maintain the existing trade continuity agreement. Are you aware of that?
Yes, we were made aware of that.
When were you made aware of that?
Last week.
Last week. You had previously called for the government to withdraw from the trade continuity agreement. Is that still your position as well?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, and albeit it's specific to the beef cattle sector, we think that the continuity agreement represents a leverage opportunity to really get our issues addressed. We haven't seen any development on having those issues addressed, and so given that we thought it was really the understanding was that it was a temporary continuity agreement before the next one was signed, we think it's reasonable to consider terminating it in an effort to address our issues.
We've heard from the minister who appeared last week on this bill as well. And when we asked the minister about some of these issues, he responded, and I'll paraphrase, that discussions were ongoing on this. My understanding is these discussions, as you mentioned, they've been ongoing for several years because the trade continuity agreement was meant to be a temporary continuity agreement. Do you believe that the current discussions, as the minister described them, are sufficient to address your issues?
Well, I have to say, recently we have been meeting much more frequently with the Minister of Trade than previous. And I do sense more broadly, we're getting much more engagement on trade-related issues, but specifically in addressing our non-tariff barriers, we've not seen any developments there.
Both agreements, the TPP and the CETA, or the Trade Continuity Agreement, contain provisions for consultations and then ultimately dispute resolution. How much longer do you think discussions should proceed before the government considers availing itself of those mechanisms?
Yeah, I mean, given that we're advocating using the continuity agreement and terminating it as leverage to address it, I'm I guess a little bit skeptical as to whether or not those mechanisms will address our issue, as we have had, as you say, lots of time since the development of these agreements. So skeptical, I guess.
Thank you. You noted in your opening remarks that you are at CattleCon, if I got that right.
Yeah.
I've heard reports that the U.S. is considering returning to some form of discriminatory labeling for beef products or other meat products. Are you aware of these discussions?
Yeah, there is. It's been a kind of an issue that has kind of raised its profile up and down over the course of the last 15 years. This year, actually, as of January 1st, they've introduced a voluntary product of U.S. label, which we're watching, concerned about, but given that it's a voluntary label, we don't have the same concerns as we did when we successfully fought a country of origin labeling case at the WTO and won. So it's, that informs our position on this issue, and it's one that that we'll continue to keep tabs on behalf of beef producers across the country.
Has the government consulted you on this new voluntary labeling? The Canadian government?
Oh, yeah, we work on closely with embassy staff, and so yeah, I would say that we're probably very much connected and have a good understanding as to what's developed there. So we don't feel like we're lacking any information on that front.
And just in the last 15 seconds I have, what would it do to the industry if country of origin labeling returned in the CUSMA review?
It would decimate that relationship. It would represent a discrimination of Canadian live cattle in the country, which would really prevent the benefits of an integrated beef market, and have implications with pricing, not just on the producer side, but on the retail side as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fonseca for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, from the testimony from our witnesses, at this committee meeting on C-13, the UK's accession to the CPTPP, we hear what's on the table, and the stakes are very high, and we've always understood that here with this trade committee, and that's why we've worked in a very collaborative way in a Team Canada approach, and we need to continue to do that, Madam Chair. I know that's, as I hear, is not the same at all committees on the Hill here. There are many that do not work the way that we do, but we understand the importance, what this means to jobs in my community and right across our great country of Canada. And that's why we do this work, and on behalf of the stakeholders that come before us, and provide witness testimony so that we can take that and use that and advocate on their behalf to be able to get the best deals, the best agreements that we can. My first question is to Mr. Buckle, and congratulations, yes, on your 75th anniversary. I just want you to kind of take us, give us the insight into what this agreement will mean for Canada by bringing the UK into the CPTPP. We heard one of my colleagues earlier talking about the bridge, the UK, Canada, being a Atlantic and a Pacific nation, and bridging over to many of our Pacific partners. But if you could take us through what some of the positive impacts would mean for my community in Mississauga, for Canadians in general.
Yeah, so I would say that we've mentioned the fact that the trade continuity agreement after CETA is still in place, and I would like to see that renegotiated. There are still elements missing that need to be there. The CPTPP, which the UK has already obviously been acknowledged as a member of that, but what we're talking about is whether Canada and the UK gets to trade on those terms. There are two parts to it. One is mentally, anytime you tell a business, whether it's in UK or Canada, that the tariff and non-tariff barriers are coming down, it makes them interested in a way that they were perhaps a little fearful of before. Going overseas and doing business is always a bit of a struggle. And when you just let them know that things are being improved, that is an important first step on that process. The other part of it, the last couple of years, we've been working with other British chambers across Latin America to get ready for this agreement, and there is a huge amount of interest across Latin America in this opportunity too. Once the UK started to look a little more broadly, looking at countries outside of the EU, as they were forced to after Brexit, all these companies that are starting to trade in South America, Central America, and North America, once they start doing that trade, they get a habit of doing international trade. They get comfortable. They have the expertise. They know how to deal with foreign banks, letters of credit, all the import-export paperwork that you have to do. And it just starts to snowball as people get more comfortable with that process. So I think the benefits for Canada are as much on the spotlight of promoting exports as it is specifically improving the recognition of Canada. The UK loves Canada. Last year's Canada England final in the Women's Rugby World Cup was the most highly watched game of women's sport in the history of sport. People love Canada. They just need the encouragement to come here and do business.
And in what sectors do you see some of the greatest opportunity? I know in my community of Mississauga that we've got companies like AstraZeneca, we've got advanced manufacturing, we've got defense manufacturers, security companies. Where do you see the greatest potential for growth and opportunity, and especially for jobs when we talk about Canadian jobs?
Undoubtedly, the defense industry is one that both Canada and the UK are world leaders in, and sadly, with the global threats that we're facing, and we know that there's going to be investment there are great opportunities. And I think those partnerships that will be more possible between the UK and Canadian aerospace industries, the OAC is obviously a fantastic organization in your region. Those partnerships will be so much easier to develop with the improved communications that we have and with the improvements that come from these trade deals.
Yeah, and with the opening of this agreement now with the UK and the CPTPP, you've heard from some of our other witnesses that are before us here today, and some of the challenges that have gone on for actually decades. Like this goes back. I recall. Former Prime Minister Harper and the Conservatives, they couldn't get anything done when it came to the pensioners or dealing with the beef or pork. So nothing was done at that time. We're still working on it. I know we do it collaboratively here at this committee. Do you have any thoughts on that, and what you could share, being the British Canadian Chamber of Trade?
The trouble always when you open up trade agreements and when you start getting into the details, we're always going to be looking at the sort of fractious elements at the edge, and I'm not diminishing the concerns of any of the other speakers here today. Most industries are doing very well and will benefit from this. When you start opening up these deals, and the UK says, well, we want to open up dairy too. Right, the idea that you could open up a one-sided agreement and not have an increase in the amount of UK dairy coming into Quebec, it's just not going to happen realistically. And it was one of the problems with the last trade agreement that we were trying to negotiate a couple of years ago. I do feel for them. I remember when I was younger, Danish pork coming into the UK was a matter of contention. Right.
Thank you very much.
We heard that that's now very popular.
Thank you very much, Mr. Becker. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
La Présidente, merci à l'ensemble de nos témoins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for their statements. My first question is for Mr. Fulton. You said in replying to a colleague earlier, did I understand you to say that there was a threat that there would be no bilateral agreements? Did I understand you correctly?
I guess to clarify, I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but to clarify what I said earlier is that we believe that using the continuity agreement as leverage to address our issues is appropriate. We fully understand that that there's a broader, sectors and broader parts of the trade relationship that are in scope here. And so we wouldn't call for a termination without an FTA in place, but we think that we would want to have the government use the leverage of the existing continuity agreement to get our issues addressed, and that is simply non-tariff barriers that are preventing Canadian beef from moving.
Croyez-vous qu'il serait même carrément...
Do you believe that it would be well advised to slow down ratification until you get an agreement with respect to standards, sanitary and phytosanitary standards?
Yes, that's exactly our position. We think that there's, as I mentioned in my opening statement, opportunities for modest changes to be made in the UK to allow for that access. It is not based on science that we cannot access the market, and I think really levering any possibility, any leverage that we have, I think should be on the table.
Croyez-vous que ça pourrait être une voie
Do
intéressante?
you believe that it might be interesting and to pursue this on a formal basis, as is done in some agreements, a mechanism that would be, say, in place for 2 years, 3 years, or more, something reasonable like that?
Honestly, we I think, are willing to try anything. We have, I think, struggled to make use of some of the provisions in the CETA agreement in addressing our SPS-related issues. But there is a desire for us to truly diversify our beef market, and so we're ready and willing, I think, to try something new.
Combien de temps, Madame la Présidente?
How much time do I have, Chairman? Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Fulton. It is going to be very useful and will help us to do the work that we have to do. We want the balance of power to be better for you. We would like to see you be able to export more. Mr. Buckle, now, you spoke about the defense industry. You know, in Quebec, we have aerospace clusters that are appreciated by many. Do you have some examples of cooperation that exist between the UK industry and the Greater Montreal industry?
Yes, for sure. One of the I think most iconic names in British manufacturing is Rolls-Royce, and Rolls-Royce has a long history in Quebec and Canada. Bombardier, back in the day, was a very big investor in what used to be called Shorts Brothers in Northern Ireland. And Investissement Quebec has a long history of investing in the UK, and last year announced, I think, just over $3 billion of investment in the UK nuclear power industry. I think the importance of Quebec to the UK economy cannot be overstated. It's a tremendous investor. It's a huge opportunity for both the aerospace and other manufacturing industries. And I know there's a lot of interest in the UK in promoting that trade.
D'ailleurs, pour le Québec,
for Quebec, the UK is the second partner after the United States in the area of exporting. It's very, very far from the U.S., of course. It's not really comparable, but nonetheless, it is ranked second. You say that there are many partnerships, a great deal of cooperation that exists. Is there an area where improvement could be made? What do you think?
In terms of manufacturing, following the collapse of the agreement or the negotiations around a new agreement between Canada, the bilateral agreement between Canada and the UK, obviously some of the things that dropped out of the continuity agreement were things like car manufacturing. That's not a big industry in itself in Quebec, but obviously Quebec is a supplier to the industry. I used to work in the aluminum industry for our British, English-speaking North American friends, aluminium for our French friends. And the increase in the exports of aluminium to the rest of the world following the tariffs that have been put on it just show how flexible Quebec can be as an industry and how important those global markets can be.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cronus, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm very grateful to be here. I want to thank all of the witnesses for their presentations. Ms. Melville Gray, I'd like to thank you for your presentation about the 127,000 Canadians from the UK who have a UK state pension that the UK refuses to index to inflation. As you know, almost 3,000 of the people in that community live in my community. And I'm wondering if you could just share with us in practical terms what a frozen pension means for a senior living on a fixed income in Canada, especially in the context of rising costs for housing, food, and healthcare.
Well, it means that they start to reduce the amount of food they eat. They cannot support themselves, and they start calling on the Canadian healthcare system and support system for other costs and so on. We know that about 50% of if you've been here for 20 or 30 years, you're down about 50% of the income that you should be getting. And you can't survive on that kind of funding in this current inflationary increase. So people split pills, they don't take their medications, they go to food banks. It's really a tragedy.
Thank you. And many of these pensioners paid into the UK system for decades. How do they see, or how does your organization see the fairness of having their pension value permanently frozen simply because they chose to retire in Canada?
Well, it's a current issue in terms of people who come here often to be with their families, for grandchildren. You know, they come to support their kids and their grandkids. But it's also a future issue. Listening to the other members today, why would somebody come from the UK when they've worked, let's say they've worked for 30 years, 20 years in the UK, they've paid in, they come here at the peak of their career to find out that if they chose to stay here, they will not be able to get an increase in their pension every year. We at least would expect to be able to keep up with the inflationary amounts, and that doesn't happen.
As you explained, this is a problem that is unique to some countries and not others. Have you ever been given a justification for why the UK provides annual increases in some countries but not in others?
The UK states that it's because they do not have a reciprocal social security agreement. We actually do have a reciprocal social security agreement, but it does not include pensions from the UK to Canada. It's simply a couple of paragraphs that are missing. It's a post-war thing that started with mostly Commonwealth countries. 50 Commonwealth countries are frozen. Every single one of the CPTPP countries are frozen. And it's an anomaly. So they pay 6 out of 10 overseas pensioners. They do not increase the annual amount for 4 out of 10 overseas pensioners.
Could the government of Canada be playing in advocating for our frozen British pensioners?
We need the government to advocate on our behalf because we are pushed aside by the UK because they feel we're far away. They don't need to deal with us. They've actually stated as recently as yesterday that their policy is to spend any pension money on UK pensioners, which would make sense if they weren't paying all of the ones in Europe and the USA specifically, as well as many other countries. So it's a discriminatory policy. We need Canada to stand up for us, to help us, to bring the UK to the table, because all we get are polite refusals. And when Canada asks the question as well, it's politely pushed away. It's time for Canada to take a stand.
Well, and this committee is here to advise the government of Canada in that regard. So if you could recommend, is there any sort of concrete action that this committee should consider taking to support you in your quest?
We would ask that you take a pause and require that as I put in my opening remarks, that you require that the government actually come to the table to negotiate a reciprocal social security agreement that is truly two-way, reciprocal. People need to be treated fairly and equally.
And just in the few seconds that I have left, I want to turn to Mr. Buckle. First of all, congratulations on 75 years. But has the British Chamber of Commerce, the British Chamber of Trade and Commerce been active on this file? Is there anything you can add?
So Some of our members are also explicitly members of Edwina's group, and as a chamber, I'm happy to leave her to speak on this because she's much more of an expert on it and she has focused on it. As say some of our members, potentially me too, I'm not that far off becoming a pensioner myself. Some of our members are already in that position, and she and her organization have done such a tremendous job of raising the profile of this issue that I prefer to leave it to her.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lavoie, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question will be for Mr. Buckle, but I also want to thank all our witnesses for being with us today. And congratulations on your 75 years. If I'm here in 25 years, I'll be very happy. I want to talk economy with you. I come from Beauport, Moilou. That's my riding. I've been involved in the Chamber of Commerce for many years in my area. You spoke to the need for the elimination of non-tariff barriers. I've heard also from my colleague his comments on the aerospace industry and what occurs between Britain and Quebec. I wonder this. What would change tomorrow morning for the ordinary Canadian citizen or for my constituent in Beauport, Moilou, if this were signed? Would this not be a signal to the rest of the world that Canada is seeking to diversify its markets? Would you agree with that point? And if not, can you give me some concrete examples of why not?
Going to be a huge difference. This is not like when Donald Trump announced his tariffs, there was an immediate global reaction to that. It's not going to be that kind of impact. The important thing is, as I said earlier, partly it's about shining a light on the opportunities and letting people know that Canada is open. Partly it's about showing the rest of the world that this group that started at 11 has already grown to 12 and is open to grow to other, to include other countries if they're prepared to sign up for the values that we share. And certainly, speaking to our British Chamber of Commerce friends in Costa Rica, they're very excited about what this would mean for them in terms of how they can do business and the standards of business in terms of equity and the environmental standards that they want to be able to stand by, but which they need the support of other countries, and Canada and the UK and Australia and New Zealand. They can all offer that guidance through this organization. So in terms of what people in Beauport will see, not a great change. En fait, j'ai joué au rugby au Beauport il y a 20 ans.
20 years ago, I played rugby in Beauport.
I don't think they'll see a lot of difference tomorrow, but I think the point is we're going in one direction when a certain other country is going in another direction.
Alors, quand vous parlez de nos citoyens, c'est les entreprises.
You talk about our citizens, but there are also the businesses and the markets that are concerned. I'm happy to have you here. I'm going to ask you a question, a geographic question. About, trade with the Americans. It's geographically speaking, it's fairly easy, but we want to increase or double our trade with Europe or elsewhere and with Asia. But they too want to diversify and come to Canada. But the difference in cost between coming to Canada or the United States is minimal in a sense. So would that not lead to a lack of balance, a lack of trade balance with the Europeans? Because when the ship brings goods from Europe, it could go further north to Canada or it could go to the United States. Would it be more complex going further north to Canada? Does that complicate things in terms of trade?
No, I think there's great advantages in that and the stability that Canada has compared to the issues that we have down south where tariffs can change whilst the ship is on the ocean. I think Canada has a great advantage there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Vous, de votre côté, pardon, Monsieur Buckle, est-ce que vous...
Mr. Buckle, do you share the UK's concerns with respect to the concern about having thousands of court challenges?
Business people I know hate going to court. They hate it for its cost, its distraction from business. It ruins relationships. It's not why anyone gets into business. I mean, there might be a few strange people who get into business so that they can have fights. Most people want to do business because they've got an excitement about doing business. They've got an excitement about customers, and they have excitement about markets. I don't see that.
Donc, peut-être serait-il plus simple d'abandonner ça.
Wouldn't it be simpler just to abandon the whole issue? Because there are multinationals that often have services that are very broad. They have all types of legal help. So maybe the challenge should be dropped or avoided if you have an issue that could be solved diplomatically at the same time.
There's definitely an opportunity to make access to equitable trading much easier for people. I think good frameworks, well-written frameworks are part of that. You're right, big companies have in-house lawyers that can do this and they want to keep busy, so they might do more than small businesses. A good framework can avoid that for small businesses, and I think that's an important part of what we want in any trade agreement.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mackenzie, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Melville-Gray, I would just like to ask you if you have any awareness of whether or not our Prime Minister Carney, has brought the issue respecting pensioners up. We do understand he has a close relationship with the British Prime Minister. Is there anything happening there that you're aware of?
Our understanding is not at present. Of course, it's only been a year that he has been in his position as Prime Minister, and there's been many things happening in the world. We have asked that on the next visit that's coming up, and also with the Australian Prime Minister, that he would engage with the Australian Prime Minister and perhaps jointly ask Mr. Starmer to assist.
Have you received a positive response to that? Do you expect that to happen, or is that simply a request that's outstanding?
That's our request. We haven't received a response as such on that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Fulton, or perhaps Ms. Babcock, the question of the Canadian cattle domestic capacity, or our industry capacity to export to the UK in the event that the non-tariff barriers that are in place are addressed. The question came up last week, the minister suggesting that our capacity may hinder our ability to export to the UK. Could I ask you to comment on that? I told him in response there are a lot of cows in my part of Alberta.
I jump at the opportunity to answer that question because it's one that we get commonly as well. I think the best way to really think about it is that there's more than 200 products coming off of a beef cattle carcass, and only a portion of them are actually in demand here in Canada. We already export about half of what we produce, either in live cattle or in the form of beef or beef cattle products. So, quite simply, it's, so many markets are complementary and have the irony of that if we are able to extract, better value for variety meats, products that quite simply have a very low price because of, non-existent demand here in Canada, then and add value there, then we can actually get the market incentives through other cuts to keep growing our herd, and not have to impact other domestic consumers. So it's actually complementary and actually has the effect of reducing over the long run the cost to consumers.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, a beef animal once processed produces quite a range of different products, which may have appeal to different markets. So indeed, that ability to sell into different marketplaces has the opportunity to increase the value from any single animal. Is that correct? Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that was much more concise than what I did. So yes, absolutely.
Just trying to make sure we're all clear. If I could ask Mr. Buckle, whether your chamber has a view on what agreements should follow from here. This committee was advised last week, others have received the news as well, that the intention of the government at this time is to continue the TCA. But there's also been some talk about perhaps a new bilateral agreement directly between Canada and the UK that might be more specific to our trading relationship with the UK beyond the CPTPP terms. And I wonder if your chamber has a viewpoint on that.
Yes, a few years ago when obviously post-Brexit, and there was, as people have mentioned, an idea that the continuity agreement was going to be a temporary stopgap. We were involved with both the UK negotiators, diplomats, politicians in expressing our viewpoint on what we would like to see in that agreement. And as with everybody else, there's 101 little bits and pieces that we all want to throw into an agreement. One of them, very personally, it's illegal for me in Ontario to call myself a qualified professional accountant. That strikes me as bizarre and unnecessary. And so certainly things like that would be good to put in there. I did mention earlier the dairy industry in the UK is keen to see Canada as a market. The car industry. There are lots of things that I think still need to be settled, and obviously people today have mentioned a bunch of very important issues that need to be settled. I do hope that both governments work towards a settlement on those ideas, and we get some progress on a bilateral agreement.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses. We have run out of time. Just a couple of comments I need to make we've had discussions. As everyone knows, any amendments will need to be in by 6 p.m. this evening on C13. And the minister will be coming for the first hour on Thursday to speak to C18, followed the second hour by clause by clause. And on C18 on Tuesday, February the 10th, we would have witnesses and officials and hold clause by clause on C18 on Thursday, again with the deadline for amendments for Tuesday, February the 10th. And any suggestions for witnesses on C18 should be submitted to the clerk as soon as possible. One other bit of business is that the House this morning has approved our request for the travel to Mercosur. So there will be discussions as we're ongoing with that issue as well. Thank you again for the committee and Mr.
Committee business.
Yes.
Just a comment with respect to committee business. As members of the committee will see, we received last week a partial disclosure with respect to our production order for USMCA CUSMA review. I would ask that the chair review what we received. In my opinion, it is not in accordance with our production order. And so I just ask you to take a look at that, and we can discuss that at another time.
Yes, I will. Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. All right, move adjournment. Thank you all very much.